Welcome and thank you for standing by. At this time, all participants' lines will be on a listen-only mode until the question and answer session. At that time, please press star followed by the number 1, unmute your line, and record your name clearly as prompted to be introduced. Today's call is being recorded, and if you have any objections, you may disconnect. I'd now like to introduce Earlene Dahl. Ma'am, you may begin.
Thank you, Robin, and thank you to Lisa Glover-West from the Census Bureau for hosting our webinar. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our September LED webinar. On behalf of the U.S. Census Bureau and the Local Employment Dynamics Partnership, in collaboration with the Council for Community and Economic Research and the Labor Market Information Institute, it is my pleasure to welcome yet another one of our esteemed speakers from the 2021 LED Virtual Workshop, Taylor Marr, as he presents Job Opportunity Tool. This presentation will dive into how Redfin used a combination of public and private data, including the LEHD Origin Destination Employment Statistics, or LODES, to create Redfin Opportunity Score. The Redfin Opportunity Score is a rating from 0 to 100 that measures the number of jobs within a 30-minute carefree commute from a given address. An opportunity score of 100 represents a home with the most job access, and scores are weighted by population. Opportunity Score is currently available in more than 350 cities across the country. Taylor Marr is the lead economist who manages the research team at Redfin, a national tech-empowered real estate brokerage. He is passionate about cities, housing and urban policy, and an advocate for increased domestic migration and mobility. He was also a data scientist and visualization whiz of Redfin's housing data. Mr. Marr participated in 2 past opportunity project sprints with the U.S. Census Bureau. The first one developed Opportunity Score, and the second sprint he built a job opportunity tool, which helps people better understand the job opportunities, pay, and cost of living trade-offs when deciding which metro area to live. Marr went to graduate school for economics in Berlin, where he focused on behavioral causes of the global housing bubble and the subsequent policy responses. He is also the vice president on the board of the Seattle Economics Council. Marr's research has been featured in The Economist, New York Times, The Wall Street Journal, NPR, and many other news publications. With that, I welcome Taylor Marr.
Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for having me, Lisa and Earlene. It's great to be here. So as Earlene said, I'm Taylor Marr, economist at Redfin. So I lead our research group where we basically take data that Redfin has, and Redfin is a real estate brokerage. We have a website. We employ thousands of agents across the country that really specialize in helping people move, whether it's buying a new home, selling a home, even renting. We have a couple subsidiaries that deal with the rental market. And so, you know, Redfin is in the business of helping people make decisions about where to live. And our team is really, our mission is to help best inform the public, best inform our customers, best inform the company about what's going on in the housing market, how to understand trade-offs that people make. And so I'm going to tell you and walk you through 2 different tools that we've made with the caveat that both of these were built before the pandemic, and the pandemic really did impact how both these tools kind of get leveraged now. But really, I'll walk you through 2 different projects we participated with the census. And so the first one is Redfin's Opportunity Score. This was built, I believe, in the end of 2015, 2016. And as she mentioned, this was a score from 0 to 100 that really measures access to jobs. The second tool it looks at jobs across the country at a bit higher level, so mostly with people thinking about relocating from one metro to another, how they compare pay, cost of living, things like that. So walk you through what are these tools, why did we build them, you know, what does it reveal in the tool, what type of data did we use, how did we actually go about building these. One of the features of these webinars is to empower others to actually leverage the data that the census would now, and hopefully these can be inspiring, and feel free to reach out if you have further questions that aren't answered here today about either of these. But with that, I'll walk you through it. So first is Redfin's Opportunity Score. So this is a project that Redfin, was among a handful of other participants with the Census First Opportunity Project, which was in collaboration with the White House at the time. And one of our goals was really to help people understand job accessibility. For any address, you can look up and see on a score of a really simple score of 0 to 100, how accessible via a car-free commute is each property or house to good-paying jobs. So with good paying, we look at jobs that have a pay of $40,000 or more, according to the data in the LEHD data set. But really, here's the tool. We can break out data by job type, look at home prices, both for sale and for rent. But if you've ever heard of Walk Score or Transit Score, some of these other scores that Redfin has helped develop, really we're just trying to take a complicated concept and simplify it down into something that's easy to compare. And so what's interesting here is, really we had envisioned with this tool a car-free commute. So primarily relying on public transit, that's either biking, walking, or taking, the bus or the transit lines. Obviously, the pandemic really upended this, and so, I say that the tool was built primarily pre-pandemic, and I'll walk you through how the pandemic might have impacted some of this, but with that in mind. So first off, here's just, you could look up any address in the tool. The tool's at labs.redfin.com/opportunity score. Unfortunately, I was hoping this wouldn't be the case timing-wise, but right now it is currently under maintenance. Just I have to update an API key, but essentially how we've used the tool is to compare addresses to see how accessible to jobs are they. So here you can envision a family that, let's say, is 2 working adults. Maybe they have kids, maybe they don't, but they're a household. And let's say they only have 1 car. And so one of them might be searching for a new job and simultaneously looking to move. One thing that stands out on the side of the left, and let's say the left is where person A works, is all of the places that are accessible via transit to that job location. And you can see in the grayed out areas, it might be hard to see, but that there are little pockets along the transit line that make accessibility to that job location really strong. And over on the right-hand side, you can see the trade-off that comes with if someone's searching for a home near the public transit stop down in Daly City, just south of San Francisco. We can see that they have a lot of access to jobs via being close to the public transit line, but that obviously cost of housing within this search region is just much cheaper. And you can see that down in the bottom right-hand side, just how the costs for rent and home prices are adjusted, but still keeping in mind access to jobs. And, when people move, even if they have a job, they might not want to, like if you're buying a home for 5 to 10 years, you might not know you're going to be at that company or have that job for the long term. And so it is still important people keep in mind, job accessibility. How many jobs will they have access if they lost their job or had to find a new one, or, maybe there's 3 working adults in a household. So this type of information can be really useful to people in identifying pockets in different cities that still maintain access to high-paying jobs. We break out what type of jobs are associated with that cluster for their search. And so the highlighted area is really what is accessible within 30 minutes of a car-free transit. And here's where the pandemic comes in, which is really interesting because our team has been tracking this data very closely, from how people have been searching to tracking the housing market data across the MLS and county records. And even we have agents, thousands across the country on the ground, that have been telling us, what's been going on, how have homes been selling in these areas. And one thing that has been a dominant theme is just how competitive suburban, more car-dependent locations have become relative to transit-accessible locations. So this is breaking apart the data for all properties across the country, looking back over the last year and a half, what's happened with home price gains in these different areas, and keeping in mind that some of those places that are high opportunity score, they're accessible to a lot of jobs via a car-free commute, they haven't been as competitive during the pandemic. That's obvious, as a lot of people have, in the era of remote work, moved to larger homes. We spend so much more time in the home, and so that's where these car-dependent homes have become really competitive. So at the same time where this job opportunity score might seem a little less relevant because of the pandemic and more people preferring to buy a second vehicle, live in car-dependent areas, this is also an opportune time where, as people are making decisions about where to live, as we're about to invest in near $40 billion in transit, public transit, this can also help highlight some of the opportunities in these very transit-friendly neighborhoods. And so it also helps highlight what are areas that maybe have a lot of access to jobs. So here's an example in Cleveland, Ohio, in Shaker Heights neighborhood. And this is an address that is largely car dependent. There's not much access for public transit. You can bike to a handful of places, but looking at where all of the jobs are located, it's largely, there's access to a ton of jobs if you have a vehicle to access them. And so combining this information of, where are the essentially transit deserts, and this is a great neighborhood that, it's okay that maybe most people prefer to drive and not take public transit at all, but this helps really evaluate the trade-offs that people are making between taking on the cost of car ownership, even if it might be cheaper to live in a place that maybe lacks some of the job accessibility, and some of that might be compensated for with higher vehicle and transportation costs. And so we can also use this information to aggregate it up across cities to look at the land of opportunity in the U.S. and how different cities compare and how accessible they are to their jobs via a car-free commute. So what we found when we did this was that San Jose, California, stood out as having the highest opportunity score across the city. The average was 70, with more than 78% of jobs paying at least $40,000 or more. And so this is a large city. Milwaukee also had second for the highest opportunity. A lot of the city is connected via public transit, and so this makes accessing all those jobs much easier. But on the other end of the spectrum, you have a place like, and I showed D.C. here, just that's where I am, that's where the census is. It's a good point of comparison for looking at D.C. versus Atlanta, which are two very large cities. They both have plentiful high-paying jobs, but Atlanta is just so car-dependent. There's not much public transit that really links where people are living to where those high-paying jobs are, at least maybe not yet. And so, this makes it score very low in terms of car-free job opportunity accessibility. So this is some of the ways that the tool has been used, either aggregating it to compare it at a high level or a neighborhood level, or figure out what are, transit deserts, or what's the premium that people pay for accessing this job. Let's say a car payment is $300 a month, but you have to pay $300 more a month to have a car-free access to your same job. That's the trade-off that you're essentially forced to make. Do you put that money in a car or into real estate or higher rent? So this is some of the way that we've looked at the data as well. So now I want to talk about how we actually built this tool. So first, it leverages heavily the WalkScore travel time API. So you can enter any address on walkscore.com, and you can see, so, maybe where you work, that is if you're commuting, not working from home, or maybe after the offices open back up and more people start returning to the office, they might have this more in mind. If people are commuting only 2 days a week instead of 5, they might also be more tolerant of a longer commute. So that's also where this tool can be helpful. But we have this API where we can, for every address in the country, figure out, including bus, bike, and walkability, what can people access? What are all the points that people can access within 30 minutes? So first we pull those, we call them transit sheds, the little shapes there of the transit. And then we pulled all of the jobs. This is where the census data really comes in, of the LEHD origin destination and the loads data of where all of the jobs with a minimum San Francisco area Every gray dot here is a job. We pull it at the block level, and then what we did is we just exploded it into random points within the block. So there's a little bit of variation there that's noise or random, but essentially you can pick an address like this red dot here in the middle left of the screen, look at all of the jobs that you can access within 30 minutes there. And then what we do is we make an adjustment for what's the competing population in order to really balance out that you're also competing for these jobs with all of the other people in the metro area that maybe are commuting to that location. So we take a population data at the block level also within a 30-mile buffer in order to make an adjustment for how many jobs you can access. This is the math that kind of goes into developing this score, but essentially binomial distribution, it just looks at how likely are you to access high-paying jobs via a carless commute. And that's essentially what it is. And we did that for all of the addresses across the country in order to create and sort of bucket in every property nicely into, is it job seeker's paradise? Is it good job accessibility? Is it just some, or is it limited? And this allows us to look at data across these different buckets and glean some different insights across cities. So there's also, like I mentioned, additional data for every address that you plug in. You can see what types of jobs are you able to access or are within 30 minutes for you, such as, are they public administration jobs, professional, scientific jobs, retail or food service jobs. So there's a little bit of information there. And then the other thing that we've done is every day we update for all of the regions, what are the home prices there? What are current home price trends? So here's an example where for each bedroom size that someone might be looking at, both for purchasing, what's the median price of a 2-bedroom, or for renting. And when the tool is working well, you can actually even click on it and it'll take you directly over to search on either walkscore.com or on redfin.com with those parameters of your location, your bedroom size, and what properties are on the market there right now. So, we have a database that all of this is stored in, feeds it up to the tool on the website. That's essentially how we built this tool. And then here's examples. If you're looking at DC, you click on a home, or you want to see, what are all the homes. This is redfin.com on the left, where you can see all of the homes that are on the market right now. And then this is walkscore.com on the right. When you plug in a destination, Walkscore will pre-populate even what the commute area is. So if you're commuting to, let's say, the White House, you can see what are all the places within a 30-minute bus or transit ride to that destination. So that's some of the ways that we've connected the tool up with helping people actually go about that home search process. So then switching gears, the other tool that Redfin collaborated in building, we call it Redfin's Job Opportunity Tool. This was a bit more recent. In about 2019, I think, I worked on this project. It was right before the pandemic. So, it's kind of interesting, again, how the pandemic might have changed this tool compared to the last one. So what this tool is, it shows metro area job clusters using data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics and a number of other sources. Where can we see for each occupation or even job category, where can we see those occupations are clustered? And so I have the example of a web developer here. You could see where are all the web developers located, where is it where they're concentrated. So Seattle has a high concentration of web developers. And then how does the pay compare for that occupation across different metro areas? So it has the bottom 25th percentile, the median, and the upper 25th percentile. So you can really see a whole pay range, even taking in mind someone who's early in their career to higher up, and comparing pay across the cities as well. And then we also, I'll walk you through the next charts. So, but first I want to answer, why did we build this tool? So at redfin.com, our agents help customers relocate pretty much every day, and people are using our site to plan their moves. I myself actually relocated just this year, and a lot of my team even relocated during this year, during the pandemic, and a lot of people have, had their life changed in many ways during the pandemic. And so people have been considering relocating. We have been tracking migration at Redfin for at least the last 5 years of paying attention to where are people coming and going to. And what we did was we developed a tool to essentially predict, using people's search behavior, predict where they're likely to actually be relocating to from one metro to another. And this allows us to aggregate this up across millions of users who are using Redfin or Redfin agents when they're relocating to get insights about where they're moving, what are some of the challenges they have when moving, where are the places that they might be considering once they have selected a metro, or how do they compare different metro areas. And so in this example, this is just our second quarter of data for this year, essentially real-time gauge as to, where are people who are leaving the Bay Area, especially as a lot of tech workers have had remote work opportunities, where they're primarily going. And what we found is that the pandemic did accelerate migration in terms of the number of people that were looking to relocate. It increased from about 26% in Q1 2020, just before the pandemic, and we watched that steadily climb over the last year to by about 5 percentage points. And it remains a little bit elevated right now, but all this to say that even though this tool was built back in 2019, it has become even more relevant as people are making relocation decisions, as they're juggling, changes to pay, where might they have good opportunity and access to jobs, even if they, maybe don't stick with that same company that's allowing them to work remote. So these are the types of things that we're paying attention to now. And this isn't just search behavior. We've also been able to follow this through with anyone who was searching for a home outside their metro. How many of them actually ended up going and purchasing a home, whether with Redfin or without, and how did that relocation take place? And the search behavior did lead those relocation decisions by a few months. So it's been really helpful for us getting a real-time gauge on migration patterns as well, as we wait for some of the census data to be released. But at the same time, we pull in all this other data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and we're looking at where all these workers concentrated. This is as of, I think, 2019 was the latest update for this data. But here you can compare pay, as I mentioned. If maybe you're wondering, thinking about moving to a new city for a certain occupation, wondering what does the pay range look like for there. It might be really small, but maybe there's a lot of good prospects for growth as well. And then what I think is most important, though, skip this slide, is when comparing pay, what a lot of people have had a challenge with, and this is feedback that we've gotten from agents and from customers, is really comparing not just pay and how that varies across areas, but then cost of living. But there's a lot that goes into cost of living. There's, if you're looking to purchase a home, and a lot of people just maybe look at home prices as a gauge of that. But also, maybe they're going to rent, there's size of home, there's access to transit, there's utility costs, which vary a lot by places. Even taxes, income tax or property taxes can be very different. So what we did is on the left, we kind of put all that together, transit costs, utility costs, taxes, housing costs. And then we have the pay data, looking at the median pay. And this will give us a good gauge as to, essentially disposable income, or how much do you have left over in pay after you cover some of the main costs associated with these different regions. So in Seattle, for example, for tech worker, computer and mathematical occupations, you can see that even though the cost of living is really high, the pay is also just high enough to still make it stand out with having a higher disposable income. That might be different if you're looking at rent or looking at a specific occupation, but that's some of the ways that we wanted to allow it easy to compare different areas. And then once you've narrowed down into a city or a metro area you're looking at, we also in this tool have a tab that allows you to dive deeper and view a handful of different metrics across the city. So on the left here is transit score. You can see what is the average transit score. This is all by census tract, so it's very fine-grained in terms of the average transit score. And you can quickly see what the transit lines are, or maybe you want to look at median rent or the monthly mortgage of that neighborhood. How many people work from home, all of these types of stats that we've pulled in from a number of different sources at the census tract level, or even on the right, I show what neighborhoods are opportunity zones. Maybe if you're a real estate investor or interested in understanding that as well. And then we also have a handful of other metrics that might be helpful for those on the other side. Now, again, this was pre-pandemic, so some of it might have been thinking through the lens of a company that's looking to either expand into a new city or hire workers that maybe are remote. Might look a little bit different now for a lot of occupations, but we have it where you can compare a handful of different metrics from the census for all different metro areas, such as how educated is the population, what's the typical pay of that worker, is this a cluster where there's a lot of, let's say, web developers where it might be really great to hire into an occupation there. Maybe they're productive because they're surrounded by a lot of web developers. So just some of the data, we pull in data on migration, walkability, transit score, bike score, all of these things that might be helpful to researchers or policymakers that want to compare different regions as well across all of this data. We were looking at it anyway, so we wanted to make it helpful and more accessible to other people. So essentially how we built this, well, in sum, we just took a bunch of data from the census, from Redfin, from WalkScore, from other sources, and really just combined it all in one place, either at the metro level where you can get a really big bird's eye view, or at the census tract level where you're drilling into a city. And here are all the sources of data we use. We put all of that combined with some shape files into a Tableau public dashboard that made it really easy to embed onto our blog, make it interactive as well, and for people to download the data. So if you're interested in either of these tools, any of the data, even if you're not getting what you need from the website because it's under maintenance or whatever, feel free to reach out as well for that. So with that, I'll turn it over to Robin to lead the Q&A and ask any questions.
And thank you. At this time, to ask a question on the phone line, please press star followed by the number 1. Again, that is star followed by number 1. Please unmute your line and record your name clearly as prompted.
Thank you, Robin. So while we're waiting for the calls to queue up on the phone, I'd like to remind everyone to please be courteous and keep your questions pertaining to the presentation with one follow-up question. We received a few questions regarding the presentation, which will be accessible on the Census Academy website in a week or two at census.gov/academy under the webinar tab. Also, an evaluation will be mailed to you following this webinar. We would appreciate if you took the time to fill this short survey out so that we may better serve you. I wanted to let you know too, Taylor, some people were having some audio issues, but hopefully that was worked out. So, Robin, are there any calls at this time?
Yes, our first question is from Tony. Your line is open. You may ask your question.
Yes. Where do you go and find this information? What's the link or the website?
Yeah, great question. So for both these tools, they're separate locations. The best way to get access to our data and tools is to go to redfin.com/news. And then from there, there's a data center tab. And on the data center tab is all of our data that we make available in the housing market. One of the tabs in there is the opportunity tool. I also put links into the presentation that once this is posted, you'll be able to just click on those links and go directly to either the job opportunity tool or the blog post that we've put out about the opportunity score, as well as the live site where you can look up addresses. As I mentioned, that is still under maintenance right now for just updating, but that's where the tool lives.
Thank you.
And thank you. Our next question is from Mark Coleman. Sir, your line's open. You may ask your question.
I was just curious to know about the funding, how it would go about finding the funding for it.
Yes. Funding for what exactly?
The paperwork that we would need for the opportunity zones, where we would find it.
Yeah, so for the funding, maybe I'm not quite understanding, but all of these tools, the data is freely available for the public. For our customers, we built these tools basically to help educate people. So they're totally free to use. Okay, thank you.
And thank you. As a reminder, for any further questions from the phone line, to please press star followed by number 1. Again, as a reminder, if there's questions on the phone line, that is star followed by number 1. One moment, please.
Thank you, Robin. While we wait for the questions again, I had a lot of questions from the chat. And one of the questions, I think I might have answered it with a link, but just in case, it says, hi, is this data available for Atlanta area, where when I tried to access the info for Atlanta and the address didn't populate?
Yeah, that may be for the opportunity score, at least, where you have to type in an address. As I mentioned, that one is currently under maintenance, where in order to update with pulling the addresses, that's something that we should have resolved pretty soon. But the other tool, the job opportunity tool, should be available for any metro. If you wanted to select Atlanta and see the maps of Atlanta or compare Atlanta with the pay data, that should be in there as well.
Great. Who would be the ideal target audience for this data? Is it a housing navigator of a nonprofit helping lower income or first-time home buyers? Is it real estate agents? Is it individuals searching? I feel like going through this tool could feel complicated for some low-tech savvy residents. I'm thinking.
Yeah, that's a great question. So both of the tools are really just meant to provide information for anyone who's going through the home search process. So it's meant to be accessible to the broader public. With that being said, most people who are looking at this tool, we found, are primarily real estate agents or city and local officials or nonprofits that are trying to understand different trends. And so, maybe it's a little bit higher level where they're helping navigate through some of this information. But yeah, so it's meant to be accessible to the public, but there are really different users in mind with not only each tool, but really even within the tool, different ways that you might want to use that, which I think I showcased, and either aggregating up the information with the raw data, or even looking at things at a metro level or breaking down within a metro. So it's really a variety of users in mind.
Another question is there a way to reverse the score? Meaning, if you are an employer, can you find out how many houses are within that 30-minute car-free area? Just thinking of this as a tool for employers to promote accessibility to their location.
That is a great question. Not automatically with the tool, but as I walk through, here's how we built the tool. The exact same principles and logic can be applied if you plugged in any address of a company. Instead of looking at all the jobs that are accessible to there, if we looked at all the households, so in the origin destination loads data set, it takes both where are people located and then where are they commuting to with their destination for work. We focused on destinations with the tool. What we need to do is look at origins of the tool, of where are commuters or workers, where are they coming from? And it's definitely a great way to think about if you're an employer, maybe looking to purchase large commercial real estate or invest somewhere, and think about the trade-off that comes with having access to a larger labor market, especially via car-free commute, or maybe not buying, someplace that is very car-dependent. It's definitely something that could be developed pretty in the same way that we went about this. Just it would be taking a slightly different portion of the data set. But we don't have that readily available. I have discussed that before because I think it's a wonderful idea, especially as certain companies want to make decisions about how can they perhaps minimize driving time in order to have a smaller carbon footprint or something. Instead of buying a LEED certified building that is in the suburbs far out and very car dependent, it might be more effective to have a more urban, car-free commutable location. So those are tools that people might want to actually develop for that reason. I definitely think it'd be worthwhile.
And I'll ask one more question before we jump to the phone. There is interest in knowing that people are moving and displacing lower income people. Have you looked at the demographics of the movers to see if they're impacting the areas in which they are moving, gentrification, et cetera?
Yeah, so we've paid a lot of attention to gentrification, as observers and understanding where are people moving, where are they buying, where are they selling. It's definitely something that we've observed taking place in a lot of urban neighborhoods that have high access. So going back to the opportunity score, the places that are very job-rich, car-free commute, those are the places that are also ripe for gentrification, especially when higher income households that want to minimize the time that they spend commuting. Again, pre-pandemic, when most people were just commuting back and forth to the office, it does actually predict gentrifying locations pretty well in that regard. But on the other hand, what we've observed during the pandemic in the era of remote work is sort of I call it a large-scale migration gentrification, where you have people leaving high-income cities, moving inland to cheaper, more affordable places, and with that comes a higher budget relative to the locals and has pushed up housing prices and had affordability challenges in a number of these cities that are experiencing big booms in migration. It is definitely something that we've reported on, we've talked with researchers about and press as well, but it I think looks a little bit different since the pandemic has been happening.
Robin, are there any questions on the phone?
Yes, we have a few questions here. Our first one is from Jose. Your line's open. You may ask your question.
Yes, I was trying to find the link, and I found the one that I think it has a glitch. What was the other one that it is working?
Yeah, the job opportunity tool is at redfin.com/news, and then data center. If you go to the news portion, that's our blog, there is a tab for the data center. And within that, you'll see the job opportunity tool. There's a couple of other ways to get there. I included the link in the slides, but in terms of navigating there, go to redfin.com/news, click on data center, click on job opportunity tool, and that's where you can see the Tableau public dashboard there to interact with all the data.
Okay, and then just a follow-up question. On the jobs that are listed on the tool, are those like new available open jobs, or are they like real time, or is this just like a tray, something like historical?
Yes, that is a great question. So all of this data on the opportunity score and the jobs and the job opportunity tool, those are not currently open positions that are vacant and waiting to be filled. They're actually looking at jobs that people had. So they're not vacancies. They're jobs either, with the loads data. I believe that data for the opportunity score was about 2015, if I recall correctly, of what jobs were held in 2015 at that time in each location, whereas the opportunity tool that was developed a little bit more recent has data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, I believe for 2019, and, what was the pay for this occupation, such as teachers in this city, and looking at actual jobs that people held.
Yeah, thank you.
And thank you. Our next question is from Chris Pica. Your line's open.
Oh, hi, Taylor. I was curious, how frequently is your data updated? And in the future, how frequently can we anticipate those scores to be changed by the changes that have occurred post-pandemic?
That's a great question. With the opportunity score, that's something, that we're currently updating, mostly evaluating. A lot of the transit feeds have been disrupted during the pandemic, and how we import, travel times and things like that. So we've tried to not actually update the access to those transit patterns and access, even though obviously some lines weren't running as frequently during the pandemic. So it might have changed things temporarily. But in terms of, the home price data, all of that we update very frequently. But we're going through a larger update on the opportunity score. The scores don't change that much. Even when they update, each address is largely just as accessible. It's pretty static over time, and based on some of the long-term infrastructure there. The other data, the job opportunity tool, we update that about once a year. We'll update with a new round of data that has been released.
Thank you.
And thank you. Our next question is from Mo Limay. Your line's open.
Yes. Hi, can you hear me? Hi, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Hello, Taylor. I had two questions, actually. The first, it looks like for your travel time, you're using network analysis. Can you confirm if that's correct? And second, on your data sources, you had a slide which showed that you're using data from BLS, CPS, American Community Survey. I was curious, are you putting these all together, or are you using each source for different parts of your tool? And I'm asking because of the time that data is collected. ACS could be every 4 or 5 years or a yearly, whereas CPS is much more frequently. So I was curious, when you said that you get all this data and put it in a database, how do you then use it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so with the different data sources, we do primarily, whether it's the census tract level data or the metropolitan statistical area data, we're pulling all of that together, combining it into one clean fashion. What we try and do is match the latest data or the latest year to be as consistent as possible across all of these different sources. So, obviously, a lot of them only update once a year at census tract level. So what we've done is basically pull all of the latest data once a year and then push that back up to the tool, including data on what were rents, mortgages, and pay in those areas. So those should update about once a year. We'll go through and push that new data out.
And do you use network analysis to calculate your travel time, or are you using another tool?
No, so the travel time, so WalkScore is a site that Redfin owns, and part of WalkScore is they've linked up to all of the transit networks across cities all across the country, and have basically been updating that to show, here's the transit line, here's all of the stops, how frequently it runs. Essentially, yes, looking at the network of public transit in that area.
And thank you. Does that finish the questions? Willie May?
Oh, yes. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Our next question is from Edward Morrow. Your line's open.
Yeah, hi, Taylor. This is really nice presentation. I just have a question regarding cost of living and state income tax and state payroll tax, if those are included in the cost of living.
Yeah, so the state income tax is something that we included, looking at data from the IRS as to what we tried to do is look at how much state income tax did people actually pay relative to their income to back out not just state income tax, maybe, for a state it might be 5%, but also look at some of the local taxes such as sales tax or anything that would show up on the IRS tax filing data to bucket local tax burden. I used to live in Seattle. Washington has no state income tax, but they have very high sales tax rates and other taxes. So we wanted to kind of incorporate all of the state and local taxes, including property taxes, in order to sort of include in the tax burden of different areas.
Great. Thank you.
And thank you. Our next question is from Camille. Your line's open.
Hi. Thank you for the presentation. I had a question that's maybe a little more general, but have you all been studying at Redfin the relationship between these job access on home price relative to other amenities that are included in the WalkScore as well? And is this information impacting Redfin's purchasing activity, or kind of how is that funneling back into the business side of things at Redfin?
Yeah, that's a great question. We haven't modeled out specifically, what's of all that goes into a home price, how much has been the premium that people are willing to pay for transit access versus maybe size. But as an urban economist, I know that people just make trade-offs between size and commute and location and the time that they spend commuting. And essentially what I've observed happen is that time commuting and access to public transit has essentially decreased in priorities, and then space for home office or home gym or whatever else it is has just increased. And what that's translated to is the location decisions that people are making is really just further away from the city center. And how we've observed that is tracking purchases that have increased in more car-dependent, less walkable areas, less transit-friendly areas. And, essentially what we've seen happen as a business at Redfin is that there's been a home buying boom over the last year. The pandemic, those location decisions are also correlated to what you can get for a rental home versus a for-sale home. And so that we have seen that push a number of renters maybe into first-time buyers as they move further out, can afford a mortgage as mortgage rates have fallen. So that's kind of some of the trends that we've observed. But in terms of, specifically people are buying into location, real estate prices are all location. How much of that price is because of specifically the access to transit versus maybe some of the other, your access to restaurants and bars and a grocery store, which is also a part of Walk Score, or local parks. We haven't been able to really break apart that completely, even though it is hard to also disentangle from most of these. But it's definitely something that, we're interested in and trying to understand.
Thank you. That's all I had.
And thank you. If there's any further questions, once again, it is star followed by number 1 from the phone lines. That's star followed by number 1.
I have a few more questions that were from the chat. Is network analysis used to determine the opportunity score?
Yeah, so I think I addressed that one earlier in that, for the most part, in terms of network access, specifically as I understand it, the transit network access, and indeed it is using the Walk Score transit API.
Thank you. Also thinking organizations that support immigrant or refugee populations that may not have a car could use this tool. I think that was just a comment. What is the cost to use Redfin?
Yeah, so to use redfin.com to go about your home search or to use any of our data on our blog, it's totally free. And to work with a Redfin agent to buy a home or sell a home, it just depends on the local market, but Redfin agents do offer really competitive fees for helping people buy or sell homes. So,
how do you deal with or address suppressions in OES data, for example?
Yeah, so I think we've largely just left them as empty, which, is a challenge when dealing with census tract data that, or even at the metropolitan area, this happens as well. What we've mostly tried to do in those is take averages to fill in some of the missing gaps, or to try and not be as granular at the occupation level in order to get more higher level insights. So switching the job categories, for example, has helped sort of avoid those issues.
Can we build travel time contour maps by mode with your tool?
Yes, the Walk Score API, the travel time API, you can select all of the different modes of transit. I believe if you go to walkscore.com, I think I put the link in the slides, that has how you can plug into their API if you're looking to do some batch polls to get a bunch of different transit views for different modes of transit, such as what are all the places you could bike to in 20 minutes versus an hour. And they have bike lane data and Walk Score and all of that. So those are some of the things that you would be able to do with that tool.
Any discussions you are having with local and county governments to link to existing GIS or Metro data sets?
Yes and no. So part of this, both of these projects have been in collaboration with the Census Opportunity Projects, the TOP group, and in both of those is really a connection for private companies like Redfin or others that are working on projects like this to take our data or our tools that we built and connect them to local and county governments or stakeholders, nonprofits, whoever it might be. And so through those forums have been primarily where we've been able to help put this in front of people. And so we're actually actively working on that right now on another top sprint via looking at COVID-driven migration and how different housing markets are being impacted and how they might want to invest in infrastructure or whatever else it might be. And so that's primarily the medium in which we've been able to address that. But we're always open to talking with local cities and governments, and we have in the past. You can always reach out to us at press@redfin.com.
Does your data center site work better on some browsers?
You know, I'm not sure. It should work on all browsers, but a lot of what is hosted on our data center are Tableau Public dashboards. And I do know that sometimes Tableau Public, it's a free service tool that we've leveraged. Sometimes it is going under maintenance or doesn't shape well with mobile. And so, you know, I apologize for any of those technical challenges. But in general, our data center should be accessible on all browsers.
When will the website be available after maintenance? Is a login required to get access to data/conduct inquiries?
No, so a login won't be required. You know, we're looking at probably a couple more weeks before we can resolve the maintenance stuff. And yeah, if there's specific data that you're interested in with the tool, you could also reach out to us directly, either email me at taylor.mar@redfin.com or Redfin, the press, as I mentioned. And we can look at seeing, you know, a lot of the data just lives in our database, and we can always be eager to share that as well.
We do have a question on the phone line.
Okay.
Elizabeth, your line's open. You may ask your question.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. I was just wondering, you mentioned that you used $40,000 as a threshold for a good salary. And I was wondering why you didn't use, say, like an area median income or something kind of more localized to different geographies.
Yeah, that's a great question. So that primarily, you know, what comes from the data set from the census, the loads data, when breaking out by job type and job location, it also is categorized by different pay groups. And I think the highest category, at least at the time that we were doing this, was $40,000. So it wasn't necessarily an arbitrary thing, but it was sort of set up as a standard across all regions. But I agree that, you know, if you're looking at high-paying jobs, you know, high-paying is pretty relative to whatever city you're looking in. So, you know, that might be something. I think our main goal was just to exclude minimum wage jobs and fast food service that might be present pretty much everywhere and might not be as correlated or indicative with high-quality job access via car-free commute.
Okay, and then I guess it looks like the job opportunity tool is pretty limited to like metropolitan statistical areas. Is the opportunity score similarly limited, or can you use it kind of regardless of geography?
Yeah, I believe it is similarly limited, and part of that has to do with, you know, where we actually have reliable transit data. So a lot of rural areas that are in non-metropolitan areas just won't have, you know, any access to public transit, and will probably have a score of 0. At least what we found in some areas that, you know, we had some overlapping data. So it is limited as well to where, you know, we feel we're capturing the bulk of what we're trying to measure.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
And thank you. At this time, I'm seeing no further questions from the phone line, but another reminder, it is star followed by 1 should you have a question.
Thanks, Robin. What are the sources for your address list?
Yeah, the address list comes from county records, so redfin.com, just as you could look up any property on redfin.com to see, what's the property's Redfin estimate, for example, or is it for sale. All of that data comes from public county records, as well as the transaction history of when was that last sold, how much did it sell for, depending on if it's in a non-disclosure place. But all of the property data, I believe there's 150, maybe even more, 150 million properties in that data set where we have all of the address matches there.
I have another question. How often do you plan to update opportunity scores? Will Redfin make historical opportunity scores available to allow for comparison over time?
Yeah, so with Opportunity Score, we've only updated it, I think, one time. Once we get it back under maintenance, we'll probably evaluate whether or not we actually want to recalculate all of the points again. It is a big project to go through hundreds of millions of points to calculate all of the opportunity. So it's a pretty big undertaking. But obviously, I think a lot of people are wondering how opportunity might be changing with the pandemic, as jobs have moved, as transit has changed, as prices have also changed with affordability. I think once we feel like we're back at a state of normal for transit access and we have up-to-date data on job destinations from the loads data, it would be worthwhile to probably reevaluate and see how has the pandemic changed opportunity, or maybe where the land of opportunity is within metro areas. So it's definitely something that we hope to do at some point, but isn't on the immediate roadmap.
Great. What is the primary reason this tool is only available in 350 cities at this point, as opposed to nationwide? Is it job data availability, or is the process too manual to do nationwide?
Yeah, so it's primarily about data availability and combining it. We could probably be able to expand that a little bit more as our data set in terms of both the housing and the transit data has expanded over the last few years. But primarily at the time that we developed this tool, those were the regions that we had reliable data on both public transit, bike lanes and bike accessibility, as well as housing and jobs data. So it's kind of, when we combine all of these private and public data sets, it's really just what's the common denominator of what's actually available. So that's what we're left with.
Thank you. So I am looking at work from home data in Austin, Georgetown area. Do the high 80 to 100% in the outlying areas mean all these people are currently working out of their homes? How does this overlay with broadband availability?
Yeah, so if you're looking at, I believe what they're referring to is in the job opportunity tool, you can select the metro area. I was actually just looking at this today in the DC metro area, where you can look at the percent that work from home. And what I did to color all of the census tracts is really shade them in a relative term, so like an index. So when it's 80 to 100%, that's not 80 to 100% of households are working from home or of employees are working from home, but rather it's in the top 80% to 100% of all of the census tracts in the metro area for where people are working from home. And I do believe it also shows the exact share of households that are working from home. But with that, it's true that a lot of where people are working from home is in the outlying areas. When people make a trade-off between size of home and length of commute or distance to amenities and jobs, what we find is that, when you are a remote worker, you typically make the trade-off of getting the larger home since you don't have as much of a trade-off of commute time. And that pushes people naturally towards the outlying areas where you can afford larger homes, or maybe even the close-in suburbs where you still have maintain access to a lot of amenities. and it's true. I think the pandemic has really shaped that in a lot of places, like in Austin, for example. So I haven't looked at how that overlays with broadband availability. We don't have that data in this data set right now.
Great. You just answered one of the questions. That was, how about access to broadband included in measures? All right, I have two more questions right now. Is the category computer and mathematics meant to include tech service industry?
Yeah, so how the Bureau of Labor Statistics classifies all of the jobs, the taxonomy, there's sort of these broader major categories. And then within each of those categories, there's all of the more minor categories like IT or whatever else it might be. And then there's the actual occupation codes, like I'm a web developer. And what I've most recently done with the tool is keep it a little bit higher to include computer and mathematics, would include all of those job categories. You can view exactly what the taxonomy is on the Bureau of Labor Statistics website to follow that up, but it should be pretty intuitive with how that those groupings work.
All right. Another question is, I noticed the data center does not list all the same metro city names under each header. Example, home prices list Louisville, Kentucky, but rental versus buy does not.
Yeah, so that is probably referring to the different data sets that we make available on there. Each place will have different data groupings that we make available. The rent versus buy in particular, I know that dashboard right now is limited to just the 50 or maybe 100 largest cities, whereas the home prices data, we try and make that available to anything we have on our Redfin website, which covers more than 85% of the population. So there are different, depending on the data set that you're trying to look at, you will probably find different names available in the drop-down list.
Great. Robin, are there any questions on the phone?
I am showing no further questions on the phone line at this time.
Great. So we're going to take the last two questions that came out of the chat. So are the walk scores, bike scores, and transit scores available at the track level nationwide for download in one shot?
We do have that data. We were licensing that data to researchers because that's proprietary data for WalkScore. However, I'm not sure if that's still the case. So if you want to email me or Redfin, we can get you connected with it. I know it's not publicly available for a one-click download on our data center, but I will have to follow up on there because I do know we have those track level scores and that many people have been using them.
And our final question for this afternoon, are you going to add broadband access in the future?
Yeah, maybe. If it's available at the census tract level and up to date, I believe that's in the American Community Survey data, so it shouldn't be too difficult to add. It's definitely of increasing importance with people working remote. So, but broadband access also, there's varying tiers of quality, and so there will be a lot to consider, I guess, with how that information might get used. But yeah, it shouldn't be too difficult to add if it's in the same format as the other data sets we've been pulling. So I don't see why not, but it's not on our immediate roadmap.
Great. So I'm going to go ahead and close out the webinar. Did you want to say one last thing at all, Taylor, before I close it out?
Yes. The final thing I would say is once this is posted, you can view any of the links, even check out the blog post that I mentioned where we've been tracking what's been going on with the pandemic as people have been buying in car-dependent areas or looking to relocate. So please do check out our blog. You can follow me on Twitter or reach out to me via email if you have any questions or want access to data. I'd be more than happy to help you get that. So it's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right. Thank you so much, Taylor. And I just want to thank everyone else for hanging in there the last 30 minutes. I we still had about 150 people still on the webinar, so listening to the great questions that you all posted. I also want to thank you for joining us this afternoon, and thank you so much to Taylor for this wonderful presentation. Join us next month, Wednesday, October 20th at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, when Heath Hayward and Christopher Goetz present Introducing the New Business Dynamics Explorer, a web-based analysis tool that enables comprehensive access to the full depth and breadth of the Business Dynamics Statistics dataset. As always, we appreciate your attendance, and we hope you have a wonderful day.
And thank you. This does conclude the call. You may disconnect your lines. Thank you for your participation.